It's your boy, Miggy 420, and I'm here with Jeff Rawson. We're going to talk about what is high, right? Tom and I are going to talk about like what is this thing that we talk about, what it means to be high. And it's really a pet peeve of mine, and I can't wait to talk about it. So let's bring everybody in. Oh, oh, how you doing, man? Can you introduce yourself? Explain like your background as a scientist and your nonprofit, what you're doing and how that's going.
Sure, how it's going. Uh, that's great. That's a good one to end on. So, yeah, I'm a chemist. All right, my name is Jeff, and I have a PhD in chemistry. I really like science, so I pursued chemistry as a pretty fundamental scientist with a plan to be a big time professor someday and do a whole bunch of research. And at some point, well down the road in my scientific career, I started feeling like my science was getting to be like too esoteric, and I was doing it was becoming in a way sort of self-indulgent. Like it was very hard for me to explain the point of what I did, and my research was pretty fundamental, deep into quantum mechanics. So I started wanting to seek maybe like a more, I don't know, impactful area of research that might have an effect on public health.
Yeah. Well,
I
let's talk
cared a
your
lot
back. I'm sorry.
about that, and I got really excited about learning about some of the public health researchers. There was one guy that I learned about named, what was his name? His name is Harry Needleman, I think, and he was a pediatrician, and he did this study where he got all the baby teeth of a bunch of kids and tested them for traces of lead. And then he had IQ tests of those same kids, and he demonstrated the connection between lead exposure, and it's an inverse correlation. And that's like why we don't have lead in pipes anymore.
No,
So,
100%. You're a nerd like me where I run a Cal lab, in case you didn't know,
yeah,
but my niche is from DC to 50 gigahertz and some other disciplines of physics like temperature, centrifuge, whatever, right? Like I'd be the guy that comes and checks the machines in a lab, checking THC percentages and whatnot. And so, but like more about your background though, because my training's in the military, right? I consider myself more of a mechanic. I'm like a very fancy, expensive mechanic, whereas you are Harvard, is my correct? And Stanford?
yeah, well, I got a PhD at Duke, and I
Okay.
did spend time at Harvard as a postdoc researcher. So I worked in the lab of this guy named George Whitesides, who is he's famous in chemistry, which means that
Sure.
non-chemists haven't heard of
Yeah.
him. He's very famous. So
Yeah.
I had that experience, and it was his mentorship that really pushed me towards cannabis ultimately, because he could recognize and he taught me to see how cannabis science is an emerging, growing kind of a thing,
Okay.
right? It's at an early point where it's about to become way more accessible, and
Sure.
you're about to be able to do a whole bunch more experiments, right? So in one way, there's an opportunity to get in on the ground floor,
Yeah.
right?
Oh,
But
it's
still,
okay.
you're a doctor
Mhm.
and PhD. What is high? That was the whole focus here.
There
Like
you go.
Yeah.
we, I'm not going to voir dire the witness and try to like establish him as an expert, but I'm going to assume that because of your education and training, that you are an expert. Miggy always wonders what is high and what does that mean and how does that feeling translate into what's going on biochemistry speaking in your brain. So, what is high for
Yeah,
weed?
that's great. And I have to say, since I'm a chemist, I'm going to approach this question like a chemist, right? You're going to get a really different answer from a psychologist. And some parts of that person's answer are going to be more authoritative, and some parts of my answer are going to be more authoritative. So
100%.
this is a complicated question. But when I think about getting high, I think I would start with like what do we mean when we talk about it, or like what kind of words do we use, right? Like
Yeah.
have some or levels a lot of times, right? Like sometimes I am fucking blazed, bro. Oops, dropped
No,
right.
it's good.
Like sometimes I'm blazed, bro,
Sometimes.
and
Yeah.
other times I'm a little buzzed, and sometimes I'm high,
Yeah.
right? And if I think about what I mean by that, I think I'm describing the intensity of a mental sensation, basically. And that sensation is some kind of a mix. It's like euphoria, right?
Yeah.
I feel really good and really happy, right?
Yeah.
And I feel maybe like a little less concerned with things. And I haven't tried a huge number of different drugs, but if I think about comparing to other drugs,
Mhm.
I think that a lot of drugs that are habit forming, right? They all seem to have some sort of similar euphoria component, right? We talk about being high on lots of different things,
Yeah. Yeah.
but it seems like a lot of the other symptoms are different, right? And tailored specifically.
Well,
So that's like
like,
a descriptive way of talking about what is
Mhm.
high, right? And it turns out that these kinds of descriptions and feelings and testing have been essential parts of research on this. So
yeah.
there isn't some easy to read biochemical number that tells you a person's highness. It's not like the level of some particular compound that communicates highness in my body, like going up in my blood, right? So
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
basically, the way that people figured out that THC gets you high is by testing it and trying it and associating it
Well,
phenomenologically with the experience. That's what people
Mecklin,
have to do.
Mecklen's experiment, right? Where he fed the party a full bunch of brownies and everybody was like giggling. And like that was his first experiment, was tricking his friends. Like, hey, we're going to have,
Tell anybody.
yeah.
He's
Yeah.
like,
Like
"Hey, would you like some brownies?
he just
What's in
observed.
these brownies? Chocolate."
Yeah. But
Yeah, I know that McCollum definitely that his lab definitely confirmed the effects of they first isolated THC and confirmed
yeah.
its effects with testing. With so yeah. How else would you know that you've definitely got the right thing that's making people high, right?
You got to trust it.
Yeah.
But my question to you,
Yeah.
because you say you don't do a lot of drugs or haven't done a lot of drugs, but do you drink coffee?
But yeah, but I drink coffee.
But the caffeine, right? Like the high just bothers me that we say like people are high or man, I'm so stoned. I recently saw a meme, topical. I don't know how topical it'll be in 4 years, but with the new administration, and it says for all of the Mexican workers out there, when the ICE comes by, pretend like you're an American, right?
Uh,
And I see that shit. Every city sees that shit, right? Like this fentanyl high or the heroin. This is something that's been prevailing shit. The 50s, right? None of this shit's new, right? But we can equate cannabis high. There's got to be. I personally have a theory about the endocannabinoid system, right? Like when you're, maybe it's oversaturated when you're high, right? Maybe it's because, like you said, you get really baked. Well,
yeah, yeah. Well, you are
I've been,
kind of bombing out that system. That's really true. Like the whole endocannabinoid system is very complicated and subtle. There is a good reason it was discovered so late.
mhm.
And in fact, like the whole system, like THC was discovered first. The fact that THC got people high was discovered. And then later, someone discovered the endocannabinoid system and endocannabinoids and what was actually going on. So, yeah, like, and that system is a really complicated biochemical system. So
That
the
wasn't until like the 80s, right? Like they didn't
right,
find
yeah,
out about
it's
the endocannabinoid system until like after I was born.
yeah,
It's fairly recent science.
yeah, that research has been done in our lifetimes.
Yeah.
So,
What what's the
yeah,
latest one? Endomide? Isn't that one that's like really linked to our like nervous system?
I'm not sure what.
There's a great documentary. I'm trying to look for it right now. That is free, and it was the reason why I talk about Mecklen's experiment is because he talks about it. So it is, if I can find the scientist. Have you seen the scientist made by this nonprofit Fundación Cana?
I haven't.
So
No.
it's a great documentary. It's on YouTube. If you really want to understand like some of the like discovery shit, like this is the right here. Let me just see if I call the scientist. I mean, you can find it on YouTube. It really gets involved into like the findings, and like we still haven't found a point to where we can describe consumption without being equated to a negative experience, right? We got to have this THC DUI thing when guarantee you I'm pissing hot for a long time, no matter what time I consume or didn't.
Yeah, well, like I said, it's a really complicated system. So it also changes a lot with exposure to phytocannabinoids, so cannabinoids from the plant. So,
Interesting. Well, let's
so
dig into that then,
that's
because
part
we
of what's
have.
hard to that's part of what's hard to study about this is that naive users are very different than experienced users.
Yeah.
And so
Well, what
how
about?
yeah.
Let's get into then the main chemistry of the two chemicals,
Mm,
and then now there's like a bazillion synthetic or semi-synthetic ones,
mhm.
all spawned though from like CBD isolate. So there's the CBD and then there's the THC typically. And then what are those two chemicals? How are they different? And how do they impact the endocannabinoid system differently?
Yeah, so CBD and THC are the two most famous cannabinoid compounds from the cannabis plant. Cannabinoid compounds get their name from the cannabis plant. The cannabis plant was the first plant discovered, and it's the only significant source of compounds with this kind of structure. They have a terpene part and a polyketide part. And those are basically two different fundamental biochemistry kind of factory pathways, the terpene pathway and the polyketide pathway. And those two pathways supply different kinds of compounds. And the cannabinoid compound found in cannabis plants is almost the only example of a fusion of those two
Oh wow.
different pathways. So it's a really unusual structure. And for the longest time, cannabis plants were the only one that was known to make it at all. They're still the only significant source, but now a few other plants have been discovered that also make compounds like this. But one of the characteristics, especially of that terpene side, is that it's about 10 carbon atoms, and it's capable of being shaped in a whole lot of different ways. There's actually like hundreds or thousands of different possible structures
Okay.
that could have. They all have the same basic framework built on this same skeleton,
Yeah.
but they have variations on about one half of their body, usually, most commonly. And so it turns out that has a lot of implications. So THC and CBD are actually two of the ones that are most different from each other
Oh,
because THC is shaped in a way so that it's relatively flat and blocky.
yeah.
But CBD has this big twist in it. So it has a really
Mm.
different shape. And so the two operate really differently. But what's funny is they hit the same receptors, even though they're shaped differently. And they do completely different things to those receptors. So this is maybe a good point for me to lay out just like a couple of definitions. So when I talk about receptors, I'm talking about the proteins in our body that actually they catch molecules and they sense them. So, and this is all, we have lots and lots of signaling pathways in our bodies that send fairly small molecules around through our body somewhere, and then they find some that's tailor-made with a nice little keyhole for that molecule to fit in like a key.
Oh wow.
That's the canonical idea. And proteins are the big mechanical molecules in our body that all of our biochemical machinery is made out of. Proteins are also the kind of molecule that can be a receptor and do something in response to a compound.
These
So
are there other receptors in our body? I never really understood that.
there's the thousands probably of different ones. And so, yeah, like biochemistry is incredibly full of signaling pathways and loops. And the thing that's crazy about it is that a lot of it is redundant and there are lots of feedback mechanisms. So there are little machines that are set up to make a certain compound, for example, right? Like some
Yeah.
hormone, right? And then to control the level of that hormone in my body throughout the day, there'll be like 6 different feedback loops or
Oh.
6 different other compounds that inhibit making that hormone or slow it down so that the level goes down, compounds that potentiate it so that it speeds up and there's more of it.
Yeah.
And like the presence of the hormone itself, if it gets to high levels, it usually slows down the machine. There's all these complicated things regulating it and a lot of redundancies. So that's how come a system like the endocannabinoid system can stay hidden for so long, is
Mm.
because it's part of some very safety mechanisms, essentially.
Right.
And in a lot of ways, it's way more complicated than the story I just told you, because in the endocannabinoid system, the receptors aren't just one kind of keyhole. There's a whole bunch of different ones with slightly different shapes. And actually, the different cannabinoid compounds can hit the receptors in different parts.
Yeah.
And it seems to like tailor it. So instead of just being a light switch kind of a thing or one perfect key that magically fits one perfect lock, it's like a sloppy keyhole. And depending on how you turn, it's almost like a whole control panel.
Mhm.
Really complicated, different subtle tailoring can happen. And so the feeling of getting high is coming mostly from CB1 receptors. So that's the first kind of cannabinoid receptor that was discovered. They call them CB1 for cannabinoid 1, and then
Okay.
When were
CB2.
those discovered?
They were discovered around the 80s.
Okay.
A lot of the work was done by a researcher named Alan Howlett at Wake Forest and her group. So
That's very important.
So she first characterized these, and what's happening in your brain with CB1 when you feel high is CB1 is usually like a retrograde neurotransmitter. So it's one of the feedback loops on your neurotransmitters that
Neat.
slows them down and keeps them under control. And when it gets hit by THC, it goes haywire and doesn't do its job the right way. And so you get way more firing of some of the neurons in your brain and different funny things happen. That's really what's going on in like a cartoon sense with a little chemistry thrown in. And so then if I think about this sloppy keyhole and this all this tailoring, and I tell you that depending on how that receptor gets hit, like what part of it maybe the molecule touches the best, it actually has a slightly different result. Well, then it starts making sense why having a rich library of different cannabinoid compounds also gives you a whole bunch of different ways to play with this. And then those keyholes are a little different in different parts of your body.
Yeah.
And we're still finding more receptors that play other roles, but it turns out cannabinoid compounds interact with them.
Neat.
So it's really complicated.
But
I have this really vivid memory of there's this poster I walked by every day in my lab in Harvard. It was in the hall, and it's about 8 feet long and at least 4 feet tall. And it had in like 10-point font and little bitty arrows, it showed like almost all the biochemistry pathways that were known. It was from 50 years ago. So it's from the 70s, a lot more known now before the cannabinoid system was, and it's already like it's impossibly dense and just an impossible to decipher network with arrows going everywhere,
Sure.
everything. It's such a web.
But the endocannabinoid system, it's entwined with the bone structure and the nervous system, right? That's fucking hard to comprehend. Like here's this plant that you have this, you tell people you have this endocannabinoid system. It's kind of like within the bloodlines, right? It's not like you have a meth system, right? Your body's not like absorbing a crack or whatever.
I
This
thought
plant,
system's dopamine. Isn't like
And that's it,
dopamine
correct, yeah,
receptors?
yeah, right. Yeah, it's like a direct
could
opioid
be
thing. And
adrenochrome.
but you do have an opioid system, right? And that was also discovered.
Right.
From
I didn't know that. Holy
drug.
crap!
Yeah, right. And endorphins, which are like the endogenous
Mm.
morphine compounds.
The endogenous opioid system.
Yeah.
Dang.
So yeah, right. And so yeah, in the same way, you have an endocannabinoid system, right?
Yeah.
And the compounds that are made for these receptors in our bodies are actually really different than plant cannabinoids. They're
Okay.
long, really long compounds with no rings in them, and so they're really like long and floppy. They're different than what you might have expected. And the thing that's funny about them, right? They're also, like I said, this is like the CB1 case, right? It's a it's a retrograde neurotransmitter at the synapse. So
Wow.
that's a very short range communication, right? And my general belief from a chemistry perspective is that the endocannabinoid system in a lot of ways is like a bunch of systems. And
So then
when we
that
tie them,
CB1 receptor. Okay.
yeah,
So
the
then
reason
that's getting
so
high
there's a
then. Like when
CB1
that hits.
receptor,
Yeah.
there's a CB2 receptor,
Mhm.
and there's even actually different shades of each of those
Mm-hmm.
because each of those receptors is made of two pieces, and the part A and part B can be different kinds. They're called G protein coupled receptors, and they have a lot of different functions in the body. But I think the endocannabinoid system in humans is mostly kind of a background system for tone. If we hadn't discovered phytocannabinoids,
Mm.
the thing that's funny about them is that the cannabinoids from cannabis, like THC, transport in the blood way better than endocannabinoids because those endocannabinoids are floppy. If it weren't for the plant, this wouldn't be like one system.
But the high.
When it's operating natively, these aren't global, like the endocannabinoids, they don't appear to be, they're mostly local transmitters. They're not global hormones.
When you say global local, do you mean like local in
In
just
one
your
part of
body?
your body, yeah. Localized, I literally mean localized in your body. Some signaling compounds are called hormones, and they're
Okay.
long-range signaling compounds. They function by transporting in the blood and going from one place to another in your body, or signaling your whole body, right?
Yeah.
Like adrenaline, right? So that's hormones. And then you've
Okay.
got other compounds that are like short-range transmitters, right? And like the most short-range are probably like neurotransmitters. Some of those are just supposed to navigate one synapse. It's really
Wow.
tiny, like they go a nanometer.
Yeah.
So I got some that travel feet throughout my body, and then I got others that travel only a nanometer, and that's their whole work. So
With that key lock you're talking about, though, you're saying like the THC is just like making it all wonky, right? Like the THC is like when people say, and again, we got these two terms that we want to address was psychoactive and intoxicating, right? Like psychoactive thing, it's a very scary term. It's psychoactive. We gotta save the children. What the hell does that mean?
yeah, that's great. Those terms have both they have like such long history, and I don't believe that either one of those really has a very narrow technical definition anymore. Honestly, partly because even like scientific discipline, like those words have been used for such a long time in multiple different scientific disciplines, but also colloquially so much.
Sure.
I think that really psychoactive, I guess, it still has a technical definition, but it's really broad because if something's psychoactive, it just means it impacts your psychology or perception in any way.
Okay.
All right. So like that could include like my coffee, where I just like feel a little pepped up.
Yes.
That could include alcohol, even
sugar.
when I'm
Yes.
totally toasted, right? That can include ibuprofen if it helps my headache a little bit because it changed my perception.
Yeah.
What about
Or even
CBD?
Yeah, yeah.
CBD, where they get the CB2
right, so
receptor?
yeah, right. And CBD can impact your so a lot of things could fit that.
Yeah.
Right, having a pleasant smell it could be psychoactive, right? Like
Sure.
right, like by that definition, maybe, right? Like if you're really broad with it. So, but like it's come to, I think that we have come to use the term psychoactive as a proxy for that feeling of euphoria and highness that we know is right. There's always an unnaturalness to feeling high, whatever the thing is, right? You got something special. Normal, right?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. So I think that's what people have come to mean by that. It'd be nice if we had a great narrow term to describe that, because high also, right? People use it for all different things. So
what's a scary
right,
word, man?
yeah, and then
Active psycho.
and then intoxicating is even worse. And, by the etymology, right? You're thinking like, oh, toxic, but
Intoxicating.
a very narrow technical definition. Either it seems to me that people, when they say they usually use the term intoxicated to mean that a person seems to be in an altered state, and it's usually in a negative connotation, right?
Oh yeah.
It's
That's like
psychoactive. I don't think, like, when I hear psychoactive, I don't think like, oh, this is going to give you cancer. But when I hear like intoxicating, I think like you're going to have negative health consequences. I could be wrong with that. Yeah.
It's definitely negative. And I think, like, historically, it's mostly been used to describe people when we think they've had too much of something or
They're
out of
drunk.
they're drunk, they're out of control, right?
Excessive, but it's
And other uses of like the term intoxicating in like culture are also that, right? They sort of like, wow, if I find a woman intoxicating, she puts me in an mental state, right? That's what I'm saying. So
yes,
that's definitely what people are meaning when they say it. I don't know, right? Like, are those the most rigorous technical definitions? So,
well, I hear the intoxicating word a lot more, not with natural cannabis. I hear psychoactive with that, but hemp derivatives. And so, like, hemp, CBD doesn't get you high per se. They say it's not psychoactive. It hits your CB2 receptors. But if you take some CBD isolate and you go into a lab and you perform chemistry, you can get all sorts of things. Well, as a chemist, what are they doing there to make these products that they claim that are legal and they sell at gas stations?
Yeah, that's interesting. So remember, I told you that CBD is actually like really quite different in shape from a lot of other cannabinoid compounds, right? Like, it has this funny twist in it.
Oh yeah.
As opposed to like this kind of more continuous blocky shape. So the reason for that twist is that there's this tag on CBD right here, say that's on THC is stitched up.
Oh wow.
And holds it this way. So
then how do they do chemistry?
The way that you stitch that together is one chemical step, and it's actually an easy reaction. You just treat it with any acid.
Oh wow.
Is any reasonably strong enough acid? Like, I'm not talking lemon juice here. It takes more than stomach acid.
So you're taking like whole plant that was considered hemp, and then it's low and
CBD isolate. They take the hemp, they throw it in the extractor, then they distill it, and then they eventually have CBD isolate, and then they do chemistry.
There you go.
It's from what I've been told.
Yeah, so it's using the CBD, and it's taking that molecule and it's stitching it up. They treat it with some kind of acid. And the thing is, I think I told you, right, that there are hundreds or thousands of different structures that you can have that are all basically on that cannabinoid framework and just slightly different. And so they're making different ones of those. Some of them
like
are
HHC,
right?
THCP, THCJD, Delta 9, Delta 10, Delta 8. Like, what is that? Just all acid? Do they just take different acids?
Yeah, different acids, different reaction conditions. In some cases, follow-up reactions after stitching that up. The challenge is, so these the chemistry, it's easy to do the reactions, okay? This is actually normally the case. This is the most common scenario in chemistry. Usually in chemistry, doing the reaction is easy, but getting the product pure is hard. That's like the part
Oh,
that you're actually trying
okay.
to getting something to happen is straightforward, right? Like I said,
Yeah, yeah.
mix any acid and cook it a little bit and something will happen. But you can make a lot of different products that are all similar in structure and they're really hard. So that means they're really similar compounds. They're really hard to separate from each other.
What's
They all have different effects. Like I said, this is a really subtle system where every change in shape changes something about the result. One of the really important things to note is that there are a lot of cannabinoid receptors in your heart tissue.
sure? I got a question though.
Really?
Yeah.
Well, is that part of the
Yeah.
thing that
And
all the reason
so one of the likely concerns for health is cardiac health.
and not my American diet of cheeseburgers and
That
not
too.
getting up?
We
I'm just
yeah,
saying,
and we don't know which one's more important. So
but
don't get too alarmed.
but here's I got but the fact that Tom brought up this conversion from hemp, right? We're in this present day world of like unmarketed. People compare like the traditional market where we had to like just take what we got, right? And we don't have to do that no more. Now they're manipulating the hemp plant to be for the experience, right? This plant is grown and smoked and enjoyed for the experience. That's the best way I can call being high, right? Like as far as the overall, like when I smoke before I go to work, when I smoke after work, when I smoke before I do some function. I wouldn't smoke before like surgery, but I'd smoke on. Anyways, my question is, so when the conversion happens, right? Do you remember spice,
Oh yeah, yeah.
right? And this was a chemically same.
All right, we have endocannabinoids, right? And then we have like the phytocannabinoids, the plant cannabinoids from the cannabis plant. Spice and K2, those products, those actually, as far as I can tell, they weren't actually just one compound. At different times, they contain different things.
Mhm, mhm.
But the compounds that they contained are not endocannabinoids and they're not phytocannabinoids. They're cannabinoid mimetics. They're
Oh,
compounds with actually a different structure again, but
okay.
they just happen to work. Because, like I said, it's a pretty sloppy keyhole. Sometimes other stuff just falls in.
Sure.
So like, is that like THCO or THCP? Like these
No, so
cannabinoids that don't
they're
exist in
not
nature?
even so not only do these compounds not necessarily exist in nature, but they also are not built on the same structural framework as the phytocannabinoids. They don't have like the polyketide side and the terpene side.
Hmm.
Many of them are indole compounds,
Okay.
which is just a totally different biochemical structural unit, basically,
Yeah,
the
yeah,
building
yeah.
block. So they're really just different compounds entirely, but
Okay.
they give you a sense of the extremes of the endocannabinoid system
Yeah.
because some of them trigger these cannabinoid receptors even more strongly than any of the phytocannabinoids do, or any of the known
Uh,
ones,
Hmm.
right? And
Heard
have
that
really
about like
wow.
they've had
THCT.
some really dangerous and unpredictable effects on people. You
Yeah.
get some severe psychoses, and also some of these are very bad for people's heart.
Well, and the reason why I bring it up is because of the D8 to D9 conversion, right? You're doing chemistry in between. Like that can't be good, especially with the nasty soup that you end up smoking at the end. In this regulated market of cannabis, I saw a thing yesterday in Illinois where somebody was defending the hemp market in the sense that, well, you guys, you being the government, didn't give us an opportunity. Part of the reason why we're still in this little constrained markets in every state, and that was one of the big arguments here in Washington State, is it's still Schedule One drug, right? We still risk. Now, the feds aren't coming to raid you anytime soon, nor is the state in most places now. We've changed attitudes, but there still is like legal existence of like this good plant that I know was grown in a garden to its fruition, flushed, and all the other things that someone wanted, the way the artist wanted to paint the paint, right? Opposed to like, oh shit, this thing's gonna get topped off in a month. We better cut it now, put it in, get it tested with a COA. We're good to go. That's all they gotta do, nothing more.
Good.
There's no packaging, there's no storage requirements, there's nothing in the hemp industry of being regulated. So my thing was like, is this bastardized hemp marijuana, what do you think is harming us? Our endocannabinoid? Do you think it's like spice? Is it the new spice?
Well, I think there's risk. I think that there's a lot of risk and potential hazard, and it's unknown. those cannabinoid mimetic compounds, those mimic compounds, I think that they give you a sense of how extreme the consequences could be.
Mm,
And I told you that it's really doing the reaction is easy, but cleaning up the products is really hard.
yeah.
Mm.
And one of the things that happens when you have a molecule like this that can find a lot of different similar structures, but each one just a little distinct. Usually a whole bunch of those are like really similar in energy. You can only control so much
Mm,
what product you get instead of when you do a reaction that gives you just one product really nice and clean, it's usually because that product was really favorable compared to all the other possibilities.
mm,
But when you have a whole bunch of possibilities that are all just about as good, you end up making a whole bunch of those compounds all in the same mess.
sure.
And so as people are consuming a whole bunch of different unknown compounds that are all on the cannabinoid framework, I do think it's just a matter of time before someone gets sick with something or some chronic impact occurs down the line. It's
Mhm.
going to be hard to untangle. When I've looked at research
Yeah.
studies, I've seen some research studies where they bought a whole bunch of different products, converted hemp space, this converted CBD space, right? Different products have different impurities,
Yeah.
presumably because they were produced with different processes. So it's going to take a lot.
Yeah.
There are a lot of different candidate compounds there that could be learned later on that we don't have any toxicology on right now. That
Mm,
could,
Regulations for getting them out. The only
yeah,
regulation is 0.3% delta 9. And so like they are just
yeah, people
going,
cheat on that all the time.
they have the ability to read the loophole and then justify anything else that allows them to read the loophole, including like when you're working with the product. And so you take the product hemp and you throw it into an extractor and it goes hot and it's not marijuana because you're not done with it yet, according to them.
mm,
And I'm like, I don't see the exception in the definition of hemp. You guys were like sticking to plain meaning until you didn't need the plain meaning. And then it's about how it's actually supposed to be interpreted. And then when I explain to them, like, well, wasn't the whole point of this to not get you high? They go, no, it wasn't not too good. And it's just all like it's money. People
yeah.
can make money from psychoactive or intoxicating stuff because it gets you high. And so, like, that's annoyed me the whole time. Like, it was supposed to be hemp, not marijuana. And then you're doing chemistry to get people high. We've been doing natural marijuana for thousands of years. We've only been doing like this Diet Coke marijuana or these chemical marijuanas for a handful of years since the Farm Bill. As a scientist, are you seeing any types of repercussions? Or how close
I
are
think
you to this industry? Yeah.
Great question.
that, yeah, the thing is, I think that so the kinds of repercussions I've talked about so far, we probably won't know about them yet. But it is true. So I believe a lot, like I think a lot of the risks are chronic.
They
But
take time to develop.
yeah, this is a continuously evolving space. And so, right, like I think part of it, like you also have to be worried about, well, what compound are they going to come up with next? And what's it going to be like, right? So, and what are its impurities going to be, right? It's just a matter of time,
Mm,
before they come up with something that turns out to have more risks. And I think a good example to look at, and this obviously is very resonant with me. So in the fall of 2019, I got really sick and went to the hospital from electronic cigarettes. And I had bought my cartridges online from an informal source.
oh no.
And it turns out I was part of a wave of people who got sick from these things because they called it E-Valley. It was a vaping related illness. And they eventually determined it was because people had started cutting the oil with vitamin E acetate. Now,
You got lucky.
nobody anticipated ahead of time that there would be bad consequences. Vitamin acetate looks really harmless. And in fact, in small scale, people had found it to be a pretty successful diluent, right? The reason it became a big practice was because people did it for a while and it didn't seem to hurt anybody and it worked well. But it turns out that when you do it on scale and give it to a bunch of burnouts like us, right? Like we suck on that cartridge until it's fucking
I don't even think it was just that though, man.
And then vitamin acetate becomes toxic.
Yeah.
So, because it burns up. So like I think that's the way you got to think, man, is that
but there's no regulation, and then so it's like cheaper probably to use the vitamin E acetate, so they used it for like to make more money, to have a higher profit margin.
Oh yeah,
and everybody got sick, and there's no rules.
The assholes who are making my carts, I actually measured it afterwards. Because even when the cart is beat, there's still like enough residue in there for me to measure like the chemical compounds that are in it. One of the last carts that I'd had before I got sick, it was like 2/3 vitamin E acetate.
Oh god, dude.
THC. It was like really bad.
You got lucky though. That killed people.
So
I'm super
like, there's
lucky.
all these weird carts.
I waited till the last minute to go to the hospital, and then I lied in the emergency room, like vaping habit. So don't do that. All right.
Don't lie to doctors, everybody.
I went to Mount Auburn Hospital. All right. If you're in the Cambridge area and you're really sick, go there.
Well, the CDC found it, and because of people being honest with how they were consumption, right? Like that's like how we find things out.
Yeah, I told the truth eventually. I just waited a few days until I was closer to dying.
Yeah. You just kept asking the doctor if they're. You're not a cop, are you? No.
Oh my god.
You sure you're not a doctor? No, I'm not. Okay, well, I might have been smoking some disgusting stuff.
Well, I knew I was. The thing that was most humiliating about it was that I knew I'd done something really stupid. Like I was so like.
Yeah, you have a PhD, bro.
It's impossible to explain. I knew.
No. You're trying to be legal, right? You're trying just to get your product. That's part of the problem I have with hemp right now is all these people thinking they're doing a safe product, everything's safe and good. We have already enough misconceptions of what we're trying to chase, right? This whole interview I've been smoking, right? Like we're talking about with the experience, right? There's some weed that's not like work weed. You're just like, I should not have smoked it. I should. Another weed, you're like, all right, I'm not really feeling it. Maybe it's the endocannabinoid system just evening out, right? It's just when you talked about earlier, Jeff, about like the inexperienced user versus the experienced user, I think there's more of like a person knowing their body versus not knowing, right? If I smoke something with like a sativa with terpene mix, maybe it makes me more elevated that day and I'm all like happy to do work. Or I'm a heavy indica smoker. Like I like to just be feeling it. I want to know like something like is, I want to fight it. I want to be like, I need to, but like that's, when I say that, you understand that, but then other people are like, man, what do you mean? This guy just wants a lazy stoner, just wants to sit on the couch and do shit, right? It's just your experience of what you're going for, the experience of high, but like, what the fuck is high?
Kind of recovery.
Yeah, well, you know, it's interesting that you brought up a little bit of judgment too, right? What's really funny, actually, is that even in the cannabis industry, sometimes people will scold each other and say, well, you must be using too much. I've seen it before.
Not that you're just dumb.
That's a funny thing to do, I think.
Yeah. Well, I still want to go test all these vapes that are for sale in smoke shops and see what's in them. How would I go about testing the vape carts to determine, like, because once I saw one advertising Pegasus Delta 8, and I'm like, what the F is Pegasus Delta 8? They're just making stuff up now and putting it on like the side. Yeah, right. And so like THCP, THCJD, Delta 8, all these.
It's really important to note that I've tested some of those products from the converted hemp space, and it's pretty common for their label to list several compounds and for it to not even really be totally clear what they're even really advertising is in it, honestly. Right. Like they'll have gummies that say like live resin, Delta 9 THCA. Yeah. And when I look at that, I'm like, but that won't work. I don't get high off of eating THCA.
No, you have to heat it.
And I don't make gummies with live, gummies with live resin, I decarb, right? Like the gummies, and if it's converted and if it's claiming it was hemp derived,
converted, then it's not hemp.
Right.
right. So then it's not live resin at all. It's a chemical product and it's distilled. So if I test the products, often they only have one compound,
Mm.
and maybe it's one of the ones that was on the label. So it's really a pretty nutty scene, honestly.
Yeah.
People are using it for drugs. Like they're using it to get high. They aren't using it. I
And
mean,
so
like,
then the
I'm not having this Coca-Cola without sugar to get high. Like it might pep me up a little bit, but I'm not going to be sitting there going like, man, I am blazed from this Coca-Cola.
yeah.
Yeah.
That's now
We
why people are buying a gummy that says it has 420 milligrams.
sure.
Yeah. So like whatever milligrams of what is like,
Yeah, I don't know.
Well,
and
you know,
then
No regulation.
how many, and then the number is usually wrong too. There's a whole range of products in every market. All right. I've just seen a lot of very low quality corner cutting kinds of products tend to show up in those vape shops.
oh yeah. My
Like
favorite is
a high concentration, I would say,
Mhm.
compared to other places, compared to dispensary retail outlets where I do also find crappy products plenty, but like
sure.
not that bad.
Have you guys seen the full spectrum hemp windows? I'm like, what the full spectrum hemp? What the fuck? It's
Yeah.
weed. That's what you're trying to sell me.
A lot of times they're just mishmashing words together in that marketing space.
It's blockchain, Bitcoin, algorithm,
Yep.
baby.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Pegasus Delta 8.
Pegasus.
The Delta 8 with wings. Yeah.
Guys, I shared in the private chat that you have access to, Jeff, the documentary, The Scientist, which I think you'll find informative, and another a documentary on that vitamin E acetate scandal, right? Like these are two things that I've been just holding on to because I like want to cover them or maybe do something more in depth later. But content, time, they never equal all at the same time. But for you guys to watch later, Jeff, can you tell us about the Institute of Cannabis Science? We've been at it for an hour. I appreciate you. We all have jobs and things that we gotta do, but this was been a great talk. And yeah, can you tell us about you, man?
Yeah. So since we've been talking so much about these concerns about safety and health, that was my motivation for founding the Institute of Cannabis Science. I founded a nonprofit to do research and consumer education and to help people get honestly labeled and accurately labeled products and be able to shop for products based on quality without getting ripped off.
Are you involved with ASTM, DSTM, any of
Yeah,
the?
I have been involved with the ASTM D37 committees on cannabis. ASTM is a standards writing organization, and I definitely believe that writing good standards is an important part of this whole thing, right? Like
Yeah,
we need good guidelines in order to have good information for consumers. I think that the niche I see for the Institute of Cannabis Science is that we're on the back end. The guidelines are the front end, right? That's all the rules that you set at the beginning.
okay.
And then people are supposed to follow them. But at the back end, you've got to check to see that they followed the rules and that the
Yes.
results were good, right? The way that happens in America is people go to the retail space and they buy the products and they see how they really were. The probably best known nonprofit organization that does this is Consumer Reports. That's like my model. I looked at this and I was like, well, there's all these people making rules and there's all these businesses out there. Some of them are trying to follow the rules more or less than others. But then who's checking, right? Where's the Consumer Reports?
Yes.
Where's the source of honest reviews that weren't bought?
No, have you? The influencer marketplace is only purchasing reviews. Like, and because we have a channel, like people, like I just get so many emails from China, like, hey, you should review this product for us. We'll send you one. I'm like, I don't care.
Yeah,
I don't-
seriously.
So that's the
Yeah.
important thing, right? Is the product, like in order for this, there's like a magic mechanism that
Right.
keeps consumer spaces healthy. Okay. It's like an
Yes.
ecology. Okay. And part of that ecology is that you have to buy the product from the retail space without the seller knowing that you're anything other than a regular customer.
Mhm.
All right. This is also the principle for restaurant reviews.
They
And
have to not know that
reviewers,
you're a reviewer.
restaurant
Help.
reviewers have a code about this. They write about it. I looked it up because I was like, I'm writing reviews of weed, like guidelines. I needed
Yeah.
something. So I was like, okay, well, what do restaurant reviewers do? It turns out that's what they do too. They're like, well, it doesn't mean anything if they know you're a reviewer.
Does-
Some of my
Like,
biggest efforts as a restaurant reviewer, I've always got a burner phone. I have fake profiles on Yelp and stuff, and I have fake profile on Open Table, and I have friends make reservations for me. They talk about all these measures they do. I learned all about restaurant reviewing.
yeah.
Still try to be better at this job.
No, in this industry, everybody who has a product, they want to get on the podcast. And so I tell a lot of people that are in hemp, absolutely not. And then not only that, they want you to review their product beneficially. And then they will also just start their own podcast and talk about the virtues of their company, which all great, don't get me wrong, but it makes way more sense to just go buy the product, take it to the lab, see what's actually in it, and then make the decision to use it or not.
Mhm.
Because there's no regulation. Like there's one thing when you go to our shop or when you go to a licensed shop in Massachusetts or in Seattle or in central Illinois here where I'm at, the product is as represented. Like it had to have been tested by that lab and it had to have passed. Otherwise, it would have gotten recalled or quarantined. So like there's a little bit more public trust in that respect. But when there's no rules, you're trusting a company who's in this space because they want to sell weed, but not call it weed.
So dumb.
When people can come up with their own ways to define all these terms, then yeah, that's really not the kind of person you want to trust. It seems like language is awful slippery with them.
No matter which one you ask, they all say it's 100% legal.
Yeah.
Now, Tom, I'm gonna fade you out, and you want to do a little sign out? I'll put you a
Uh,
solo with the QR code.
Yeah, let's thank Jeff for coming on the deep dive. So, hey, Jeff, once again, thank you so much for coming on the deep dive and sharing some wisdom about what it is to get high.
Hell yeah, dude.
Thanks a lot for having me. I don't know if it was wisdom, but it was at least one guy's idea.
Oh, it was knowledge. And then you don't have to pull out right away, but I'm gonna pull this out of the show. Thanks for hanging out, guys.
Yep. Hey, that was another deep dive on cannabis legalization news. And if you would like to sign up to our newsletter, you can do so right over there. That QR code will take you to an email sign up. On Sundays, we send out our newsletters. This video will also become a newsletter, and you would get a copy of that too. Hope to see you on Sunday at Cannabis Legalization News. And if you made it this far, thank you. And don't forget to like and subscribe, of course.